Jelly Roll has filed for divorce from his wife, Bunnie XO, after nearly 10 years of marriage. Reports are that the decision was mutual. It's a private family matter.
Some love stories
1 minute,
become
50 seconds, and she wrote about her babies and about a forever she clearly still believed in. She was telling everyone watching that her heart was completely full on the very day her husband would later choose as the official end of their life together. Either she had no idea what was already coming, or she was holding her whole world together with trembling hands while the ground silently opened beneath her. What is certain is that none of this was impulsive. He brought in one of the most respected divorce attorneys in all of Nashville, a lawyer known for quietly steering famous people through their most painful endings. This was not a decision made during a single bad argument. This was something measured, something planned, something he carried in private long before any of us were allowed to see it. And as the world spun, trying to make sense of it, the only words offered by the people close to them described it as a private family matter. That phrase is a door closing softly in your face. Everything we are about to uncover lives on the other side of that door. The small signs that screamed the loudest. In the first week of June, just days before the story broke wide open, Jelly Roll performed at one of the largest country music festivals of the entire year. He stood before a stadium overflowing with people who adored him. And somebody finally noticed his hands. The wedding ring was gone. For a man who had permanently tattooed his devotion to this woman across his own body, an empty ring finger glowing under those massive stage lights was not some small oversight. It was a confession he was making without ever speaking a single word into the microphone. Then there was Bunnie, behaving exactly the way Bunnie has always behaved when the world expects her to fall apart, which is by refusing to break where anyone could watch her do it. Just hours before the news detonated across every screen in the country, she posted a photograph of herself looking strong and free, and she wrote that she was finally getting her sparkle back. She lip-synced along to an old rock song about being reminded of who you truly are underneath all the noise. The people who pay close attention to these moments understand the message instantly. You honestly cannot make sense of this divorce until you understand that these two human beings were never supposed to last beyond a single weekend in the first place. The van, the chapel, and a promise made on nothing. They met in the late summer of 2015 out in Las Vegas. He was a complete nobody at that point in his life. He was performing a tiny show for maybe 20 people, sleeping inside an old white van that he had actually given a name to, surviving on $500 gigs without even an apartment key to call his own. She was working as a high-end escort, and she happened to be in that same room that night, there with another man entirely. By every rule that governs how the world is supposed to work, absolutely nothing about these two fit together. He has laughed openly about the fact that she was not his type and he was certainly not hers, that he loves Taylor Swift of all people, that on paper the two of them made no sense at all. But the way she tells the story of that first night will stop you cold every single time you hear it. She said that the very second she laid eyes on him, something deep inside of her went perfectly quiet and simply said, "There you are." As though she had spent her entire life searching for him and had finally found the one face that matched a feeling she had never been able to put into words. The two of them built a genuine friendship long before they ever built a romance. He would text her asking for advice about his young daughter. She would actually take the time to listen and to care. And by the summer of 2016, that quiet friendship had transformed into something that neither one of them could outrun any longer. On the very last night of August that year, standing together at a concert, he grabbed a microphone and asked her in the rawest, most unfiltered words you can imagine whether she will marry him that very night in Las Vegas. She said yes without a moment of hesitation. They drove straight to a little wedding chapel and married on the spot, two completely broke people gambling everything they had left on each other, with nothing in their pockets but a stubborn and beautiful kind of faith. And only a handful of days before that wedding, his life had already changed in another enormous way. He had welcomed a newborn son with a previous partner. Bunnie did not flinch at any of the chaos. She walked straight into it and helped him fight for custody of his young daughter, whose own mother was lost somewhere deep inside her addiction. I really want you to sit with what that actually meant for her. This woman married a struggling man and immediately chose to become a mother to children who were not hers by blood, on a budget that barely existed, while building an entirely new life completely from the ground up. She even got herself sober for the sake of those children. That was the foundation these two poured together with their bare hands. And that foundation is exactly why what came next nearly destroyed every single piece of it. The betrayal that should have ended everything. Only 2 years into the marriage, the entire fairytale split right down the center. In 2018, Bunnie discovered that her husband had been unfaithful to her. This was not one reckless night that he instantly regretted and confessed. By the accounts that have come out in the years since, this affair stretched across the better part of an entire year. She has described the sheer gut punch of finally learning the truth, the horror of realizing that the one person she had trusted with all of her broken pieces had turned around and broken her all over again. She gathered up her life and went back to Las Vegas. The marriage, by every reasonable measure any could possibly apply to it, was finished. Years later, Jelly Roll finally spoke about that dark chapter with a kind of raw honesty that most famous men never find the courage to reach for. He called it one of the worst moments of his entire adult life. He admitted to the affair openly and without a single excuse, and he spoke about the long, ugly, exhausting work it took just to attempt to repair what he had so carelessly shattered. He has said that he was surrounded back then by people who were cheating on their own wives, surrounded by people who were lost in drugs, and that he slowly became a mirror of whatever he chose to stand beside. He did not soften it with pretty words. He did not try to shift the blame onto her. He simply owned the wreckage he had caused. And Bunnie, in her own time and in her own voice, eventually reframed the entire devastating chapter. She wrote that their castle built in the sand had to crumble completely so that the two of them could finally rebuild on solid ground instead. But please pay close attention to the years quietly hidden inside that beautiful sentence. She has admitted that it took years for her to believe this man truly loved her again, years before she stopped feeling like something disposable that could simply be tossed aside. That single word, disposable, deserves to stay with you because it reveals exactly how deep the wound was cut and how much trust had to be rebuilt one painful brick at a time. Here is the cruel irony buried inside their reconciliation. The harder these two worked to repair their marriage, the more the world around them began to transform in ways that neither of them could have ever prepared for. The rise that quietly rewrote everything. Bunnie walked away from her old life entirely and built something that belonged completely to her. She launched a podcast that grew into a genuine empire, pulling in well over 1 million downloads every single morn. And climbing all the way to the very top of the comedy charts. She was no longer the woman quietly waiting at home for a struggling artist to come back. She had become a star in her own right, with her own devoted audience, her own income, and her own powerful voice that millions of people tuned in faithfully to hear every week. Meanwhile, her husband became one of the most famous men in all of American music almost overnight. The struggling rapper from inside that old white van suddenly had #1 songs, award show trophies, sold-out arenas, and a redemption story that the entire country wholeheartedly fell in love with. He went from playing to 20 people in a tiny bar to filling enormous stadiums in what truly felt like the blink of an eye. In the late summer of 2023, the two of them returned to that same Las Vegas chapel where it all began and renewed their vows, and she called herself the luckiest girl alive on that beautiful night. But fame is a strange and heavy thing to carry into a marriage that is still quietly healing from a deep and recent wound. He was constantly out on the road. She was busy building an entire world of her own that no longer depended on at all. Two people who had once survived together inside the cramped space of a single van were now living lives so enormous and so separate that the silence stretching between them only kept growing wider. And somewhere deep inside that growing distance, the simple question of who they truly were to each other slowly began to lose its old and easy answer. The marriage they swore was different. These two never once pretended to have a traditional marriage. Bunnie has spoken openly and without shame about the fact that their relationship always operated by a completely different set of rules than most other couples. She has explained how a former working girl and a former street hustler simply do not love each other the same way two people raised behind white picket fences do. In her own writing she described their bond as free rather than open, and she made it abundantly clear that their version of commitment looked nothing like the version most people picture the moment they hear the word marriage. To the two of them, that difference was never a weakness to hide. For many years, it was the entire secret behind their survival as a couple. In the spring of 2025, Jelly Roll sat down for an interview and said something that almost nobody bothered to flag at the time. He warned that anybody who believes a marriage is a one-size-fits-all kind of arrangement is eventually going to end up divorced. He said that any couple who thinks their relationship fits neatly into some standard mold is heading toward an ending within the next decade for certain. On the surface, he was talking about other people. He was talking about the general public watching at home. But go back and listen to those words again now, knowing everything we know, and they suddenly stop sounding like simple advice and start sounding like a man quietly describing the exact pressure that was slowly crushing his own home. That is the closest thing we have to an actual admission, and it is a genuinely haunting one. He never sat down and confessed a single dramatic reason for ending this marriage. Instead, over the years, he kept telling us piece by piece that a marriage only survives when both people keep choosing the very same unusual shape together, again and again. The chilling implication underneath all of it is painfully simple. Somewhere along the way, one of them stopped fitting that shape, and the very freedom that once held them together so tightly slowly hardened into the distance that finally pulled them apart for good. If this story simply ended at two people drifting apart, it would be quietly sad but survivable. What makes this particular ending genuinely unbearable is what the two of them were still planning right up until the final months. For years, these two carried a private ache that most of their fans never fully understood. They desperately wanted a child of their own together, and her body kept making that dream nearly impossible to reach. She has spoken with raw and painful honesty about blocked tubes, about losses she grieved quietly, about being forced into a medically induced version of menopause after a brutal reaction to fertility treatment. This was never some casual passing wish for them. It was a year-long battle fought almost entirely in private, with countless tears that rarely ever made it in front of a camera. And then, in the early part of 2026, they shared the most hopeful news of their entire journey. They revealed that they had finally found a surrogate and were preparing to welcome twins, using her eggs and his genes, at long last turning the dream they had first whispered about on their very first night together into something real and within reach. I need you to picture that timeline very carefully. They were openly planning to bring two brand new lives into their family. They were standing together at award shows thanking each other through visible tears. And then, within a matter of just a few short months, the very same man who spoke so tenderly about those babies was quietly writing down a separation date and hiring a divorce attorney. So, where exactly does all of this leave the two people who built an entire kingdom out of absolutely nothing and then walked away from it without shedding a single public tear? The quiet goodbye and everything that comes next. By every sign available to us, they are clearly trying to end this the same careful way they survived everything else they ever faced, which is quietly and entirely on their own terms. The people surrounding them keep returning to that same gentle phrase, a mutual decision, a private family matter. He has already thrown himself straight back into a massive tour. She has very visibly begun reclaiming her own identity, posting about her sparkle slowly returning and stepping back into the spotlight as a woman who flatly refuses to be defined by any man, even one she clearly loved this deeply for this long. The two of them still share the children they raised together, and that particular bond does not simply vanish just because a marriage finally does. What we keep circling back to is the strange and quiet dignity in the way these two chose to let each other go. There were no leaked screenshots thrown into the world. There was no ugly public war waged across social media. Two people who first met as the single most unlikely pair imaginable, who somehow survived a van, a betrayal, a sudden tidal wave of fame, and a heartbreaking fight to start a family, simply looked at one another and quietly decided that loving each other no longer meant staying together. And honestly, after every single thing the two of them walked through side by side, maybe that gentle silence was the most loving gift they had left to offer each other. So before you click away, I truly have to ask you this. Do you believe this marriage was always quietly destined to buckle under the crushing weight of all that fame and all that painful history, or do you believe something very specific happened in those final silent months that the rest of us may never be allowed to know? Share your most honest thoughts with me down in the comments below.